Now is the time for the leadership keynote. But before we begin, let me throw in a quick fact. When Steve Jobs was asked to reinvent Apple, he tapped Dano on the shoulder to help him sort out his channel. I am talking about none other than Dano Ybarra, an international speaker and best-selling author of Guiding Your Raft. We are thrilled to have Dano again this year as a keynote speaker, and this time he'll be discussing leadership in difficult times.
So I like to think of our businesses as a raft, and we are the guide in the raft, and we're typically in the back of the raft in an actual river raft, but our team is up in front of us listening for our commands and direction and inspiration. During the calm waters, as we see up above, we can do planning and thinking, and we can execute exactly as we'd planned. But once we hit the rapids, everything changes, and we need to be agile and be thinking about what's going on. In this case, you can see the guide back there working really hard. His team is waiting for commands, waiting. Finally, he gives some commands, but it's too late. He didn't guide his raft, and he ends up in a bad place. We do not want our businesses to end up there. A few years ago, I had the great opportunity to go river rafting on the American River in California. We had a great guide, and during the calm waters, he trained us. We practiced and trained us, but nothing could prepare us for what was to come. We did hit many rapids and did very, very well, but there's one, he said, is always unpredictable because the rivers constantly change, just like our business environment continually changes. And when we came up on if you're a river rafter, you know what an eddy is. And basically, it's best way I can describe it, it's a hole in the river. A tornado is happening inside of the hole. So we came up, we went into the hole. Now, typically he was giving us commands, but in this case, he gave us a new command we hadn't practiced. He said, hold on. And we held on. And he went to work, and we went into this hole. We turned 360 degrees and then emerged out the other side of the eddy successfully. Now, only about 1 in 2 rafts exit this successfully. The rest crash. So when we think about guiding our rafts or guiding our business, we need to know what's going on, but we need to also be prepared for the things we cannot truly prepare for. I'm Dano Ybarra, and we're talking about leadership in tumultuous times. And I'm going to go through the 5 things we absolutely must do as we hit these rapids, these tumultuous times. I take a lot of these stories out of my book that's available on Amazon, but you also get a few things that aren't in my book here today. Businesses survived the tech bubble bursting in 2000, 9/11, the recession of 2008 to 2010. Will you survive COVID-19? Well, you're here. So that means you survived the first year. 2020 was all about reaction. We had to respond to the crisis any way we could. And we put together systems as fast as we could just to get things working, keep our customers working. And that was essential. I like to think of it as we always talked about it on the ranch I grew up. We put it all together with bubble gum and baling wire. And it's kept a lot of our businesses afloat, and it's kept us afloat. But 2021 is the time to be proactive, to be very, very distinct and deliberate about how we now start setting up our systems. As we look to emerge, just like we emerged from the eddy, as we look to emerge on the other side of COVID, we need to make sure that we're getting our systems in place for long-term, for scalability, for redundancy, for reliability. So my first rule, when you hit tumultuous times, is don't quit, change the rules. I'm going to tell a little story. It was back in 1999. I had joined as a co-founder a company who had created the first DSL routers. Now, I know DSL is old school now, but at the time, it wasn't even available on the market. And we were running out of money quickly. And I had lined up a lot of carriers who said they were going to deploy DSL. as customers, and we were just sitting on pins and needles waiting for someone to open up the floodgates and launch DSL. Well, British Telecom was amongst the first, and we were excited because we'd worked closely with them, with their labs. We had all the technologies working together, and they loved our product. They loved it for a lot of reasons. They loved it for the technology. They also loved it because of the form factor. They could actually slide it through mailboxes that are in the doors. So the little mailbox slots in the doors of small businesses and residential. About a week before they deployed, they gave me a call. They said, Dano, we have some bad news. I said, bad news, what's going on? They said, well, we're going to place our first order in a week, but you're not going to get it. And I said, whoa, what's wrong? And I could tell the person on the other side of the phone, someone I'd worked very closely with, he wasn't real happy about giving this news, but he said, we cannot buy from a startup. In fact, we have to purchase from companies who are already on our authorized vendor list. Oh boy, it took the wind out of me. And as I sat there, and I could tell from his voice that he was also frustrated. And then it came to me, I thought, wait a minute, can you give me the list of your authorized vendors? He says, absolutely. And he gave me the list. And I said, if I can get my product to you through two of those, would that satisfy your needs? Because there were two requirements. One, an existing vendor that was already authorized and not a startup. And two, it had to be dual sourced. And I could sense the smile coming to his face on the other side of the phone. He goes, yes, but you don't have much time because we have to place our order next week. I said, great. And we hung up, and I made a call to Fujitsu, someone who I'd worked with for some time in the past. And I said, hey, would you like to get $1 million order next week? And he said, yeah, what's the catch? And so I explained to him the situation and said, but we have to get this contract signed within the next couple of days so that you can get the order. And he said, let's make it happen. And so we did. We started working on it, and within 3 days, we had the contract. As soon as I hung up with Fujitsu, I called someone else I knew, Alcatel, and basically gave them the same story. And they said yes also. So a week later, British Telecom placed an order for $1 million with Fujitsu and $1 million with Alcatel. And of course, Fujitsu and Alcatel in turn placed the orders with us. And we were off and running. Don't quit. Change the rules. Think of a different approach. Think of a different perspective. Just because you got to know, or because the pandemic changed the way we're doing things, change the rules. Make them yours. Own it. That's must do number one. Number two, build an ecosystem. What's an ecosystem? Well, I have a great story about that. I did have the opportunity to work with Steve Jobs many times, but I wasn't involved in this particular case. Mark Benioff, the CEO and founder of Salesforce, had launched his company. They were doing fairly well, although they hit a plateau, and he got stuck, and he couldn't seem to figure out how to get his company back in growth mode. So he called a friend, Steve Jobs, and they went to lunch. And at lunch, after they finished their pleasantries, Mark explained the situation, and Steve said, okay, Mark, here's what you have to do. 3 things. First, in 24 months, you need to be 10 times bigger than you are today, or it's all over. Second, Salesforce needs to get a huge client. And third, Salesforce needs to create an ecosystem. Mark said, what's an ecosystem? And Steve said, I don't know what it means to you, but you got to figure it out. And then they left it at that. Well, Mark did figure it out. And we know it today as App Exchange. And you think about the power of App Exchange, where now hundreds of vendors have integrated with Salesforce, and they're out on the streets selling Salesforce along with their product. So literally overnight, Mark was able to quadruple or 10x his sales organization through App Exchange. So it's a great situation where you can build an ecosystem. Now, when we're talking about channels, when we're talking about our customers, when we're talking about our distributors, we need to be looking at ecosystems. Number 3, over-prepare, then go with the flow, or I also like to call it simply pivot. Just like in a river raft, we were very well prepared for any kind of rapid. However, once you hit them, you can't fight them. You have to go with them. And no matter how much preparation you've done, you sometimes have to take a different course than you'd planned based on the ebbs and flows of the river. And the same with our businesses. Sometimes we need to pivot. Sometimes it's a little bit, sometimes it's a big pivot. I had the opportunity to be asked to be a CEO of a company that had just been funded in Silicon Valley. And one of the funders was Venrock, a very well-known VC firm. They were some of the early funders of HP, of Apple, and many others there. They have a conference room full of logos that they sponsored or that they invested in and that became very successful. Arthur Rock, one of the founders of Venrock, took me to lunch early on and said a lot of things, but the thing that stuck with me is he said, the going in proposition is never the exit proposition. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, always keep your eyes open. Just because you think you're in a particular business doesn't mean that's the best business. It doesn't mean that that's maximizing your core competencies. And you may have to shift, pivot, zigzag, whatever it takes to be successful. And we need to be asking ourselves this question too. Is our solution still compelling to our client? Is it still essential to our bottom line? Is it fundamental to our brand? Does it match our brand? Is it who we are? And we constantly need to be asking these questions, and never more so than during the pandemic. Jack Welch, someone who I look up to, and I didn't know him, but I certainly read his books. He talked about something very important. He says, success comes from our ability to deal with the daily while we plan and execute on creating our future. Now, what does he mean by that? We have to work in our businesses. The problem is we get so consumed working in our businesses, we forget to carve out essential time to work on our businesses. And he says the discipline of doing both at the same time is what allows us to thrive in the markets we serve. There's a great story. A few of you may remember this, but I was living through it more at I was at a retail computer store and was watching this happen. But as we know, Intel is a great company today, but it wasn't always in the microprocessor business. In fact, they started out in the transistor chip business, basically memory chips. And Gordon Moore, the chairman, was the guy famous who made the prediction that transistor chip performance will double every 18 months. And that's Moore's law, and it's held up. We've seen that happen since the introduction of the first PC in 1981. Andy Grove was the CEO of Intel, and in 1984, they faced a major crisis. The Japanese decided that they wanted to own the semiconductor business. And so
Dano, your mic is muted again. Please turn your mic on. You're on. I think we can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Great. I will share my screen again and continue. I apologize for that. So what ended up happening was they had a heart-to-heart. Andy Grove to Gordon Moore, and he said, if we got kicked out and the board brought in a new CEO, what would you think he would do? And Gordon immediately responded, get out of the chip business. And so Andy then replied, well, then let's walk out that door, turn around, walk back in as if we were the new executive team and do that. And that they did. Andy Grove saw the future where microprocessors would become the dominant driver of Intel's success. And of course, we saw that happen. It wasn't easy. Intel had a culture that believed that DRAM was the core technology of the company, and he had to change that. Let me tell you one more quick story about pivoting. Steve Jobs, as you know, founder of Apple, inspirational, grew the company and was kicked out. I met him when he was trying to make Next a success. He was a customer of mine. I was at Adobe. Well, when he went back to Apple, I had left Adobe and he asked me to come help consult on his channels. But he also invited me into some of the other meetings. And you think about it, 3 years prior to Steve coming back, Apple was barely profitable. The previous 2 years, they lost money. They were growing. They grew from about 6 billion to 7 billion, but were losing money. 1998, enter Steve Jobs. What does he do? He goes around and he figures out what they have and what they're doing that's not right. I got to participate in the printer group. He invited me to watch this because he knew I knew a lot about printing. And he asked all the product managers to talk about what they're doing. And they all got up and talked about their products and features, benefits, all of that. And at the end of every presentation, he said, what makes this unique compared to everything else on the market? And what innovations do you have planned for the future? All of them except one just held their hands up and said, it's the same as everything out there except the Apple logo. The one guy had the wherewithal to actually be ready for the question. He said he ran the scanners and he said, well, when you put this piece of paper on the scanner, if it's crooked, we straighten it out when we scan it. And Steve said, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Steve was very gracious and thanked them all. The next morning, he shut down the division. There was no innovation, which was Apple's core. And this, mind you, was $1 billion business and profitable. And he went through the entire company doing this and making adjustments. The following year, they were profitable at about $6 billion, $1 billion less than the previous year, but they were profitable, almost 300 million in profits. And this is what Steve did. He had to reevaluate the business, figure out what their core was, what's not matching who they are, and they're an innovative company. So when we take a look at how people pivot, how they make things happen, it's really interesting. I want to go back to my story of my DSL routers. We actually, when I joined the company, we weren't a DSL router company. We were an ISDN router company. And I spent about 6 weeks trying to figure out how to expand that market. We had a few sales, not many. We were on a run out of money in 6 months program. And I came back and sat down with Chuck, who's an amazing man. He was the founder, a great technologist. And I said, look, we're not going to make it an ISDN, but you're working on something else in the back rooms. Can we talk about it? He said, absolutely. So he took me back and showed me DSL, all about it. I said, well, why aren't we doing this? We're amazing. And he said, well, it's easy because you just take the ISDN chip off our motherboard and put the DSL chip on, and it's now a DSL router. Can even be a T1 or an E1 router. I said, fabulous. Well, let's do it. And he goes, well, no one's deploying DSL today. And so we went back and we just thought, planned, figured out what's going on. We're not going to make it as an ISDN router. So we did put a stake in the ground and said, we are going to be a DSL router company. And 6 months later, we were out of money, but the sales started coming in. And not only did they come in, within 3 quarters, we were doing over $8 million a month. We sold the company for over $1 billion. So that pivot, that recognition that we were going after a market that no longer existed was essential to us making a hard decision to pivot, and it paid off big. So now what? Well, you know that pandemic selling is different than what we did before. There's no more going to the office, in-person networking, sales calls, travel, lunch meetings, event marketing in person. What we are doing now is selling over video. We're social selling, LinkedIn Navigator, cold calling and cold emailing, webinars like this one, right? Great virtual events, client relationships, everything in the cloud. And we, like I mentioned earlier, we've cobbled all that together really quickly. I found an interesting quote from Glenn Robertson he's from the UK. And he said he's going out with a big prediction where 2020 was where the channel switched on digital rather than just talking about it. 2021 is going to be the year of partner experience. And I add to that partner experience, customer experience, user experience. It's a new experience with the new rules. You think about it. 2 weeks ago, Salesforce announced no more going back to the office. We're staying virtual. LogMeIn, a sponsor of this conference, they're repurposing their buildings to be meeting places and not office spaces. And several others have made announcements similar to that. And so he said, you know, while it's considered will start to be one of the core around which partner programs, ecosystems, there's that word again, ecosystems, communities and marketplaces are built around the partner experience. So how do we achieve exceptional partner experience, customer experience, and user experience? Well, we have to master the new tools. We put them in place. In fact, we've been using CRM in the cloud for some time. Video conferencing, we used a little. Virtual selling, a little. Sales training is different now. The way we approach things virtually is very different. And of course, sales management training is different. We need to get our technologies there too and master them, not just make them available, master them. The digital transformation that I spoke about last year and the previous speaker spoke about happened overnight. And so we need these things in the cloud. For example, video conferencing isn't enough. We need to figure out a way to virtually bring our offices back together and function more as an office, even though we're virtual. I have a new product that'll be announced in a few months around those areas. I'm also an advisor to a fabulous company called Spicy, and it's a great tool to manage your partner ecosystem and your vendor ecosystem, your supplier ecosystem. I'd look it up, but in all situations, we need to go to the cloud. It's fine to have local backups, but we need to be working out of the cloud in order to not just survive, but thrive in the new world. The last thing I want to talk about, and this I believe is probably the most important thing we need to do, is exceptional leadership. How do I define exceptional leadership? One, we have to have a vision of a world that does not exist. For example, maybe we just have a better way to answer the phone. That's a vision of a world that doesn't exist. Maybe one of our customers, we see how they can improve their operations, improve their profitability, improve their bottom line. That's a world that doesn't exist. Maybe like Steve Jobs, we want to put a dent in the universe. We need a great vision. And then we need the passion for creating that world that doesn't exist, the kind of passion that gets you out of bed in the morning when everything is going wrong. And then coupled with those two, we need to be able to inspire. The ability to transfer our vision and our passion to others. There's a saying in India that goes like this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the way you're going to rally your team, that you're going to run your raft, that you're going to win, is when you have your vision and you have passion around that vision and you have the ability to share and transfer the vision and passion to all of those around you. It may be investors, it may be analysts, it may be influencers, and of course, your team and your customers. So let's step up in these tumultuous times. Let's show exceptional leadership, and let's apply all of the things we've heard in this conference and today, and let's win. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dano. It was a pleasure to have you. I hope everyone enjoyed your keynote session as much as I did. Thanks again for joining us and taking out the time.
You are very welcome.
Thank you.